By the early 1960s, drag racing had become America's fastest-growing motorsport. From the salt flats of Bonneville to the paved quarter miles sprouting up across the nation, racers and engineers were in a constant arms race, each seeking the next evolutionary leap in speed and power. But it was one man, a former child actor named Tommy Ivo, who would create a machine so radical, so impossibly powerful, that governing bodies would essentially ban it before it ever turned a serious lap in competition. This is the story of the Showboat, a four-engine dragster that was so far ahead of its time, so mechanically and visually extreme, that it fundamentally changed not just how people thought about drag racing, but what drag racing could be as spectacle, as entertainment, and as a platform for raw mechanical audacity. But before we dive into the beast itself, we need to understand the man who built it and the world he was racing in. Tommy Ivo was born in Denver in 1929, but his family moved to California when he was young, and his mother had connections in show business. By the time he was a teenager, he was already a working actor. He appeared on the original Mickey Mouse Club, acted in jungle films, performed in over 100 movies, and landed a starring role in the television series My Little Margie, which became something of a hit. By any measure, Tommy Ivo was successful in Hollywood. He made good money, he was recognized, and he had a career that many actors would envy. But Tommy Ivo wanted something more. He wanted speed. His first visit to a drag strip came in 1952 at Saugus, California, when he piloted a stock Buick down the quarter mile at an unremarkable 66 miles per hour. But something clicked. He was hooked. The immediacy of it, the raw power, the simplicity of the competition. Line up, accelerate for a quarter mile, winner takes all. It captured him in a way that Hollywood never could. After seeing Norm Grabowski's famous kooky car T Roadster at Bob's Big Boy in Glendale, Ivo decided he had to build his own drag car. What followed was a gradual progression that would define the next 2 decades of his life. He built a Model T Roadster with a tuned Buick engine, and it was undefeated in its class. The car even made appearances in movies alongside its famous owner. By the mid-1950s, Ivo was fully committed to drag racing. He built his first purpose-built dragster, again powered by a Buick, and it became the quickest gasoline-powered dragster in the nation. At the 1959 U.S. Fuel and Gas Championships, Ivo's dragster reigned supreme. But Tommy wasn't done innovating. He was just getting started. The late 1950s saw the rise of fuel-injected engines and increasingly sophisticated mechanical systems. Racing technology was accelerating faster than it ever had before. In 1957, the National Hot Rod Association banned the use of nitromethane fuel, which meant that if you wanted to go really fast, you needed to think creatively. Ivo's first creative solution was a twin-engine dragster. He took 2 Buick nailhead V8 engines, mounted them side by side on a common frame, and created something that had never been seen before. The twin-engine Buick dragster was an absolute revelation. It became the first gasoline-powered dragster to break the 9-second barrier in the quarter mile. It was the first gas dragster to reach 170 miles per hour, then 175, then 180 miles per hour. Drag News credited it with an 8.69-second quarter-mile run, which was extraordinary for a gasoline-powered vehicle at the time. The twin-engine car was fast, it was unique, and it was becoming increasingly famous. Ivo toured the country with it, making money on appearance fees and match races, establishing himself as drag racing's first touring professional. But Tommy Ivo was never one to rest on his accomplishments. If 2 engines were good, he reasoned, wouldn't 4 engines be even better? The logic was simple. More displacement equals more power, and more wheels to drive that power through the track should mean better traction and faster acceleration. The idea wasn't entirely original. Mickey Thompson, the legendary speed record holder, had already explored the concept with his Challenger Y, the quad-engine streamliner, that had set a land speed record at Bonneville in 1960 at 406 miles per hour. But Thompson's car was a land speed vehicle built to run in a straight line at one location. What Ivo wanted to do was build a touring dragster with 4 engines that could compete and perform at drag strips across America. In 1960, Ivo approached Kent Fuller, one of the most respected chassis builders in all of drag racing, with his vision. Fuller was skeptical. 4 engines meant massive weight, massive complexity, and massive potential for disaster. But Ivo was persuasive, and more importantly, he had money. Ivo paid for the entire project himself and convinced Fuller to take on what would become one of the most ambitious builds in drag racing history. The specifications of the Showboat were staggering. 4 Buick nailhead V8 engines, each a 401 cubic inch block that Ivo had reworked out to 464 cubic inches each. That meant a total displacement of 1,856 cubic inches. The engines were equipped with 32 throttle bores and 32 fuel injection points, all breathing in unison. The combined power output was estimated at over 2,000 horsepower, making it one of the most powerful vehicles ever built at that time. To put that in perspective, the average passenger car of that era produced about 300 horsepower. The configuration was ingenious from an engineering standpoint. The 2 engines on the left side of the car, mounted facing backward, drove the front wheels through a Hallebrand quick-change center section with a different ring gear orientation to handle forward motion. The 2 engines on the right side drove the rear wheels through another Hallebrand quick-change, this one positioned directly behind Ivo in the driver's compartment. The entire car was set up for all-wheel drive, which theoretically should have meant superior traction and the ability to harness all that power more effectively than a conventional single-engine dragster. Kent Fuller and his team spent nearly a year constructing the Showboat, and when it was completed, it was nothing short of extraordinary to look at. The engine dominated the entire chassis. The 4 massive V8, with their distinctive nailhead valve configuration, filled virtually every available space in the car. To the average spectator, it looked less like a dragster and more like an engine with wheels bolted to it. It was mechanical excess incarnate, and it was beautiful in a completely outrageous way. When Ivo first tried to drive the car, however, he ran into a significant problem. The television studio he worked for, concerned about liability and safety, absolutely refused to let him race it. They considered it far too dangerous. And they weren't wrong. Racing a quad-engine dragster with 2,000 horsepower was inherently risky. There was no precedent for it, no data to suggest it was safe, and every rational instinct suggested that catastrophe was likely. Rather than argue, Ivo made a pragmatic decision. He would find someone else to drive it. He turned to a young, hungry driver named Prudhomme. Prudhomme was in his early 20s, ambitious, and looking for his big break in drag racing. Being tapped to pilot Ivo's wild new creation was exactly the kind of opportunity he'd been waiting for. Prudhomme would go on to become one of the greatest drag racing drivers of all time, and his association with the Showboat would be the beginning of his legendary career. He became the primary driver of the 4-engine dragster, and what he discovered very quickly was that the Showboat had a fundamental flaw that would define its entire competitive existence. The problem was elegantly simple in its description, but nightmarishly complex in its implications. The Showboat was too powerful for its tires. When Prudhomme would launch from the starting line, all 4 tires would spin simultaneously. Not just a little bit, completely and utterly. The engine's 2,000 horsepower would hit those tires, and all 4 wheels would light up, engulfing the entire car in a massive cloud of tire smoke. The dragster would look more like a smoke-generating machine charging down the strip than an actual racing vehicle. In fact, according to Ivo himself, the visibility was so poor that all you could do was hope you were pointed in the right direction when the smoke finally cleared. From a traction standpoint, it was a complete disaster. While the car was extraordinarily powerful, it couldn't effectively transfer any of that power to the asphalt because the tires simply couldn't grip. 4-wheel drive had theoretically offered the possibility of superior traction by distributing power to all wheels instead of just the rear, but the amount of power available vastly exceeded what the available tire technology could handle. This was the early 1960s. Slick racing tires were still in their infancy, and nothing in existence was prepared to handle 500 horsepower per wheel. The Showboat quickly became a spectacle rather than a competitive threat. It would roll up to a drag strip, and crowds would gather in anticipation. When it launched, the sheer visual drama of it, the explosion of smoke, the mechanical roar of 4 V8s all screaming at once, the sheer impossibility of what they were witnessing, made it worth the price of admission alone. Fans had never seen anything like it before, and they would never see anything like it again, at least not in drag racing. But the NHRA establishment was not amused. Wally Parks, the president of the National Hot Rod Association and a man of considerable power and influence in the sport, was deeply concerned about what the Showboat represented. If Ivo's 4-engine dragster proved to be a viable concept, others would certainly build them. The precedent would be set, and suddenly, you could have a parade of multi-engine vehicles all trying to one-up each other with increasingly outrageous power plants. From a competitive standpoint, it muddied the waters. How would you classify such a vehicle? What would the rules be? How would you ensure fairness in competition? But perhaps more importantly, there was a safety concern. A vehicle with that much power and so little traction control was inherently unstable. The NHRA, for all its faults, did take safety seriously. They had seen too many drivers killed in accidents, and they had a vested interest in ensuring that drag racing remained popular with fans and sponsors. A series of catastrophic failures involving multi-engine dragsters would be a public relations nightmare and potentially a legal liability. So Wally Parks and the NHRA made a decision. The Showboat would be allowed to exist, but it would not be allowed to race in sanctioned NHRA competition. It would be relegated to exhibition status only. The car could travel to drag strips and put on demonstration runs. It could thrill crowds with its impossible power and smoke, but it could never compete for points, never win a race, never be part of official competition. It was, in essence, a legal limbo, approved but not permitted to race. Ivo was undeterred. If anything, the NHRA's decision to make the Showboat exhibition only was the best thing that could have happened to it commercially. Ivo already had significant success touring the country with his twin-engine dragster, but the Showboat took that touring concept to an entirely new level. He had a custom-built 10-wheeler truck with glass sides, so crowds could see the car from the road as it was transported. He would pull into drag strips across America, traveling from California to the East Coast and back again, and draw massive crowds just to witness the spectacle of the 4-engine dragster in action. In doing this, Tommy Ivo essentially invented the concept of traveling professional drag racing shows. Before Ivo, drag racing was primarily a local or regional activity. You'd go to your local strip, watch the local heroes, and that was it. Ivo changed that calculus entirely. He created the idea of a drag racing traveling circus, a tour that went from city to city, bringing the spectacle and the innovation directly to fans across the country. He made money not from winning races, because he couldn't enter them, but from appearance fees, from exhibition runs, and from the sheer draw of being able to see something that had never been seen before. By 1963, Ivo decided to pivot. He had proven that the 4-engine concept worked as exhibition entertainment, and he wanted to get back into competitive drag racing. He sold the Showboat to one of his crewmen, a guy named Tom McCory, for a modest price. McCory saw potential in the machine that went beyond just driving it down the drag strip. He decided to transform it into something entirely new, a funny car. A funny car at that point in time was still an emerging concept, but the general idea was a dragster-style vehicle with a full production car body bolted on top of it. The funny car class was growing in popularity, and McCory sensed an opportunity. He reached out to George Barris, the legendary custom car builder, and they began working on a radical concept. They would take the 4-engine dragster and give it the body of a 1966 Buick Roadmaster station wagon. George Barris sketched out the design, combining the front end of a Riviera with the cabin and cargo area of the Roadmaster, creating a full roofline and even adding a real roof rack. Then McCory took those designs to Tom Hanna, one of the greatest body men in all of hot rodding, and Hanna hand-formed every panel. The result was remarkable, a quad-engine dragster hiding underneath the seemingly innocent body of a station wagon. The car was called the Wagon Master, and it became nearly as iconic as the original Showboat. The station wagon body did more than just look cool, though it certainly did that. It served a practical purpose as well. The tall cabin area of the Roadmaster provided space for the Hallebrand quick-change center sections that were mounted vertically in the car. It allowed for better weight distribution and gave the car a lower center of gravity than the original Showboat. Hanna also incorporated an innovative escape hatch into the design, a feature that would become standard on funny cars for decades to come. If something went wrong at high speed, the driver had a quick exit strategy. The Wagon Master retained all 4 nailhead engines, all the power, all the spectacle. McCory and later drivers would take it on exhibition runs across the country, and it became an even bigger draw than the original Showboat. The absurdity of it, a station wagon doing 170 miles per hour down a drag strip, captured the imagination of crowds in a way that even the radical dragster had not. It was funny, it was powerful, it was unprecedented, and it was entertaining in a way that pure speed rarely achieves. Tommy Ivo's 4-engine creation, whether as the Showboat dragster or the Wagon Master funny car, toured for decades. It changed hands several times over the years. Different drivers piloted it, different owners promoted it, but the car itself endured. It became a legend in drag racing circles, not because it won races or set records, but because it represented something fundamentally important about the sport and about innovation in general. It represented the willingness to ask, what if, to try something that had never been tried before, to push boundaries and ignore conventional wisdom. The Showboat was banned from official competition, yes, but that ban inadvertently made it more famous, not less. Because it couldn't race, it had to entertain. It had to be spectacular. It had to be worth the price of admission purely on its own merits, not on the basis of winning a trophy or prize money. And in that regard, it succeeded beyond measure. It drew fans to drag strips. It generated magazine covers. It captured the imagination of an entire generation of automotive enthusiasts who watched it charge down the strip in a cloud of smoke. Years later, in 2007, Tommy Ivo, now in his 70s, commissioned a replica of the original Showboat dragster to be built. Working with collector Ralph Whitworth and fabricator Bruce Dida, they meticulously recreated the car using original specifications and original components where possible. The replica was built alongside the original Wagon Master, which was part of Whitworth's automotive collection. The idea was to preserve both versions of the machine, the dragster and the funny car, for future generations of enthusiasts to appreciate. Tommy Ivo's legacy in drag racing is profound and multifaceted. He was a driver, an innovator, a showman, and ultimately a man who understood that drag racing wasn't just about going fast. It was about entertainment, spectacle, and pushing the boundaries of what people thought was possible. The Showboat itself never won a significant race, never set an official record, and was banned from the competition it was theoretically designed for. Yet it remains one of the most iconic and influential vehicles in the entire history of drag racing. The 4-engine dragster concept has never really taken off in drag racing since then. A few other builders attempted it. Gary Weckesser built the Mach-Fru funny car with 4 Ford engines in the late 1960s, but these were rarities. The concept proved impractical for actual racing purposes. The advantages of multiple engines were negated by the massive weight penalty, the traction problems, and the engineering complexity. But as a concept car, as a rolling laboratory, as a statement of mechanical audacity, the Showboat stands alone. What made the Showboat so important wasn't that it won races or revolutionized the sport competitively. What made it important was that it showed what was possible. It showed that drag racing was big enough, wild enough, and imaginative enough to accommodate radical experiments. It proved that innovation didn't have to fit neatly into established categories or follow established rules. And perhaps most importantly, it established Tommy Ivo as one of drag racing's great visionaries. A man who saw the sport not just as a competition between drivers, but as a platform for mechanical creativity and spectacle. Tommy Ivo continued racing for decades after he sold the Showboat. He would go on to be the first drag racer to break the 6-second barrier in 1972, running a 5.97 in a top-fueled dragster. He raced funny cars. He even raced jet-powered dragsters. He traveled to England in 1964 with Don Garlits and other legendary racers to introduce drag racing to the British public, where he famously defeated Garlits and caused such a stir that he became an international drag racing ambassador. He appeared on television. He wrote books. He was a stunt driver in the movie Heart Like a Wheel, and he became the first professional drag racer in the truest sense. A man who made his living not from sponsorships or factory backing, but from his skill, his innovation, and his ability to draw crowds. But if you ask most people what Tommy Ivo is remembered for, what his most lasting contribution to drag racing culture is, the answer is almost always the same: the Showboat, the four-engine dragster that never won a race, the machine that was so far ahead of its time that it had to be banned, the creation that represented not speed records or trophies, but pure mechanical ambition and the audacity to ask why things had to be done the way they'd always been done. The Showboat is a fitting monument to Tommy Ivo's genius. It's a car that teaches us that sometimes the most important innovations in motorsports aren't the ones that win championships. Sometimes they're the ones that inspire. Sometimes they're the ones that make people stop and think about what's possible. Sometimes they're the ones that prove that drag racing is about more than just quarter-mile times and trophy cases. It's about pushing limits, breaking rules, and reminding us all that in racing, as in life, the only real limitation is imagination.